It's a question about a myth about friendship and about relationships in general. And I wonder if this is something um, that carries over or that you see in your research. But have you ever heard of the 7-year itch?
I think that means like if you're married, like at 7 years, you want to divorce your partner or something. Is that what I don't
Yeah,
know?
yeah. So the idea is like, 7 years into a meaningful relationship, there is a moment of crisis because your relationship has gone to a point where you know the person and you're familiar with the person so much that you might be that relationship might become tiresome and I've
Boring.
actually recently had or boring or even just or it might be like the negative cycles might have established themselves in such a way that you feel entrenched. And I've heard people say the same thing about friendships. You mentioned that our species is prone to long-term friendships, but I've also heard and experience as I've become an adult, like I've read articles about how there's like a crisis of friendship and how when you're an adult, especially after you have children, like there's this kind of isolation that happens because you're just so focused on your individual, family that your like the ability to maintain adult relationships becomes very difficult. And so I just personally have like talked with friends of mine and I have friends from, all different I have the benefit of having lots of friends in different age groups so I can talk to them about like how they've experienced friendship over time. And they have mentioned the same thing, that they've experienced cycles of friendships and cycles of relationships. And I wonder, can you speak about that?
Yes, yes. So we did what I think may be the first study that looked at the duration of adult friendships. Like the median, like 50% of divorces and American marriages end in divorce or whatever the number is. And you can look at the average duration of a marriage and compute what it is. I don't know that number off of the top of my head, but I do know the average duration of a friendship. And in the modern United States, it's about 10 years. And most adults have the experience of remembering that they were really close, intimate friends with somebody. And then they didn't necessarily have a breakup. They didn't necessarily end badly, but it sort of ended. It petered out, it fizzled out. You maybe think warmly and fondly about that person. Maybe if you saw them again, you might pick up where you left off, but you're not in intimate, ongoing contact with them. So the median survival of a modern American adult friendship is about 10 years. Now, in addition to that, however, there's some range. Sometimes you're friends with people 2, 3, 5 years. It's a work specific or life stage specific situation. You're
Mm-hmm.
really intimate friends with the parents of your infant children's friends, parents, but then you move and those friendships go away. Other times they're lifelong friendships. I have 2 lifelong friends, from when I was 10 or 11, a man I met in Greece who's now my age, in his 60s, but I've known him for half a century now. And
Wow.
we just pick up where we left off. I go to Greece and I visit him and we tease each other in very jejune ways. And, but there's a kind of intimacy and trust there. I've known this guy my entire life. So, and I have another friend from high school who actually introduced me to my wife, and he's been a lifelong friend. And, there are those kinds of friendships as well. But you're absolutely right to highlight that friendships can have a natural evolution. And and you don't necessarily need to think ill of yourself if a friendship ends. I think it just ends. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean it was a bad friendship. They just end. Now, romantic relationships is again complicated. Even if you look at marriages, and they're not institutional marriages the same way that the Hadza hunter-gatherers have. The Hadza, some marry for life. I forgot the number, like 30% or 40%. This number is known, like how many Hadza marriages, exclusive sexual interactions, and where everyone sees these people as a couple, are lifelong. And it's a third or some number approximately that. But the Hadza will have a partner and reproduce with that person for, I don't know, 10, 20, some odd years, and then they will have another partner. And so there's a kind of natural thing. But we as a species tend to be monogamous, one partner at a time, and tend to have lifelong romantic attachments, but not always. And it also doesn't mean we are always faithful to our partners. I mean, there's a lot of variation and heterogeneity. We're talking about sort of general principles here. We're not like like wolves. We don't reproduce like wolves or like gorillas. We don't just take them and leave them and stuff. That's not how we humans organize our romantic lives, because that's not how we evolved.
Right. And in terms of just, okay, so and it seems like, what are the factors that lead to there being a kind of life cycle? Like, why is it 10 years? Is it just because there are certain like milestones in people's lives where there are shifts that happen every 10 years or so that would lead to a restructuring of your social interactions?
I'm sure it's all those things, Amanda. I'm sure it's I haven't thought about that actually. I'm sure that some of it is just, especially in American society where we're very itinerant, like in many European or other traditional societies, people live in the same city their whole lives. So it's much easier. We move, that's why mortgages have a 723, kind of structure where you get the fixed rate for 7 years, because actually I think the average tenure in an American house is like 7 years or something, because we move
Interesting.
around in our
The
society.
7-year itch for a house, too. Huh.
Yeah. So, I think so. Part of it is that. Part of it is as boredom. Part of it is life stage specific. You make friends with your children's friends' parents, and so on. I mean, I think there's a lot going on there, and I'm sure they're a heterogeneous set of explanations. And also, it's not like all friendships end in 10 years. Like we said, there's some last forever. My wife has three close friends from her childhood. Two, unfortunately, have died from chronic illnesses, but one is still alive and is still her friend, again, half a century later, just like in my example. So, there's also death is another thing that will limit friendships. So, yeah.